The storm had chased them for hours. Thick, ash-gray clouds roiled across the sky, swallowing the twin suns behind a curtain of unnatural darkness. Their ship, the Odyssey, carved through the atmosphere of Theta 12, its hull rattling against the violent turbulence. The wind howled like a living thing, clawing at the vessel with spectral fingers. Dr. Elias Cade clutched his harness, watching the readouts flicker wildly. "This is suicide," Rourke, the pilot, snarled as he fought the controls. "The scans didn't show a damn hurricane." "It's not a hurricane," Arya Voss muttered, her voice tight. "It's something else." Elias didn't doubt it. Theta 12 had been a ghost world for centuries. A planet of rumors, of whispered legends passed between scavengers and archaeologists. It was said to hold the last remnants of a civilization so old that even the Dominion's archives had little more than myth. But Elias had found something. Buried deep within an ancient relay station orbiting a dead star, he had uncovered coordinates, a cryptic reference to the Veiled City. It was supposed to be hidden beneath the sands of Theta 12, lost to time and war. And now they were here. "Brace for impact!" Rourke roared. The ship lurched, the force slamming Elias against his seat. The Odyssey spiraled through the storm, its shields glowing under the strain. Lightning flashed, illuminating the world below for the briefest moment. And that's when Elias saw it. Beneath the storm, through the haze of swirling dust, something massive lay hidden. Towering spires, black as obsidian, jutted from the dunes. A vast structure sprawled across the valley, its design unlike anything human. The sight stole the breath from his lungs. The city was real. There. "Put us down." Before Elias could finish, the ship slammed into the ground. The Odyssey lay crippled in the sand, smoke curling from its damaged thrusters. The impact had knocked them off course, but it didn't matter. They had found it. Elias and his team stood at the edge of a colossal gateway, half buried in the shifting dunes. The entrance was lined with impossibly intricate glyphs, symbols that pulsed faintly with an unknown energy. Even after millennia, the city was alive. Arya ran a gloved hand over the stone. "I've seen nothing like this before." "Because nothing like this should exist," Elias whispered. Rourke adjusted his rifle. "I don't like this. Feels wrong." They moved cautiously into the passage. The air grew thick, humming with an unidentifiable power. Their lights barely pierced the darkness, but the deeper they went, the more they saw, statues of imposing figures, their eyes seeming to follow the team as they passed. The silence was absolute. Then the whispering began. A voice, not human, drifted through the corridors, reverberating off the walls. "Did you hear that?" Arya hissed. Elias nodded, but he wasn't sure if the voice was inside the chamber or inside his head. They stepped into an immense chamber, and time seemed to stop. A vast cathedral-like hall stretched before them, its ceiling lost to shadows. Pillars carved from a metallic black stone rose like titanic ribs. In the center stood a monolithic throne, adorned with symbols that seemed to shift when Elias looked at them. And then, something moved. A shape detached from the darkness, stepping into the dim light. Tall, armored in living obsidian, its form impossibly fluid yet solid. A helmeted face, smooth and featureless, turned toward them. A deep, resonant breath filled the chamber. And the Protector spoke. "You should not be here." The voice wasn't human. It wasn't mechanical either. It was something in between, something old and uncompromising. Elias froze as the towering figure descended from the throne, each step sending a pulse through the floor. "You are not the first," the Protector said. "And you will not leave." Rourke raised his weapon. "Like hell we won't." Before anyone could react, the Protector moved. Not walked. Moved. In a single, fluid instant it was upon Rourke, its hand a blur of motion. A terrible crack filled the chamber. Rourke collapsed, his head twisted at an unnatural angle. The Protector turned to the rest of them. Arya screamed, firing her rifle. The energy blasts sizzled against the being's armor, but it didn't even flinch. Elias grabbed her, dragging her backward as the Protector advanced. Run! They sprinted through the dark corridors, the sound of the Guardian's pursuit echoing behind them. The city was changing. Walls shifted, hallways closed, pathways that had been open seconds ago were suddenly sealed shut. It was like the city itself was alive, guiding them, trapping them. Elias knew then, this wasn't just a tomb. It was a prison, and they had just awakened its warden. The team burst into a cavernous chamber, larger than anything they had seen before. In the center, a monolithic structure pulsed with golden light. A vault. Elias's heart hammered. He knew, instinctively, that this was the city's secret. Arya panted beside him. "What the hell is this place?" The Protector's voice echoed from the darkness. "The last seal." They turned as the Guardian emerged, its form shifting, its armor warping into something more monstrous. Elias stared at the vault. "It's a containment facility." He turned to the Guardian. "What are you keeping locked away?" The Protector paused. Then, for the first time, its voice was not cold. It was almost regretful. "Something far worse than me." The walls trembled. A deep, guttural sound came from behind the vault. And then, the seal began to break. Elias realized the truth. They weren't trespassers. They were bait. The vault shuddered as something moved behind it, something vast. The golden light that had once pulsed from its core flickered, dimming with every second. The Protector stood motionless, its towering form silhouetted against the shifting glow. Elias couldn't breathe. He had spent his entire life chasing the secrets of lost civilizations, but nothing had prepared him for this. Arya grabbed his arm. "We need to leave. Now." "We can't," he whispered. "If that seal breaks—" A deep, reverberating boom shook the chamber. The vault's surface began to fracture. Shimmering cracks spread across the monolithic structure, golden energy seeping through like blood from a fresh wound. The temperature dropped, and the very air seemed to vibrate with something unnatural. The Protector moved suddenly, stepping toward the vault. Its armor, dark and fluid, rippled like living obsidian. "You do not understand," it said, voice deeper, filled with something that almost sounded like pain. "You have accelerated the inevitable. Rourke would have shot first. Rourke would have fought. But Rourke was already dead." Elias took a cautious step forward. "What's in there?" The Protector hesitated. The booming grew louder. The cracks widened. The vault was failing. Elias's mind raced. He had read the ancient texts, the fragmented records. The civilization that had built this city had disappeared overnight, its people erased from time. No bodies, no ruins, only this place, buried beneath the storms of Theta 12. A city with no name in the Dominion archives, because it was never meant to be found. Arya's fingers dug into his sleeve. "Elias, do you hear that?" A whisper. Not a voice. Not a sound. Something deeper, more insidious. It crawled through his skull like fingers pressing into his thoughts. It wasn't speaking in words, it was unraveling him, peeling him apart thought by thought. He staggered back, gasping. Arya's eyes went wide. "It's in my head." The Protector turned toward them, and though its face was featureless, Elias could feel its gaze. "If you want to live, you must leave." Another boom. The vault's foundation splintered, and a black mist began to seep from within. Not mist. Tendrils. Elias had no more questions. "Run!" They bolted, sprinting toward the passage they had come from. The ground buckled beneath them, stone warping as the very fabric of the city twisted. The walls groaned as if in agony, and the statues that had once stood still were now turning their heads, hollow eyes following them as they ran. The whispers became screams. Arya tripped, slamming hard against the ground. Elias skidded to a stop, grabbing her arm. The Protector materialized beside them, moving faster than should have been possible. It lifted Arya with inhuman strength, its touch cold, even through her suit. "You were warned." The vault exploded. A shock wave of energy ripped through the chamber. Elias, Arya, and the Protector were hurled forward, slamming into the far wall. Silence followed. And then it emerged. A shape, impossible to comprehend, unfolded from the shattered vault. It was both infinite and nothing, a mass of shifting darkness threaded with veins of unnatural light. It moved without form, without substance, yet it was there, bleeding into the space around it. Elias tried to look away, but he couldn't. The thing didn't have eyes. But it saw him. It saw everything. The Protector rose to its feet, standing between them and the thing that had just been unleashed. "You do not belong here," it said, its voice a command, a declaration. "This place was your tomb." The entity shifted, and for the first time it spoke. Not in words. Not in sounds. It spoke in reality. The city around them melted. The towering walls twisted into bones, the stone breathing as if alive. The statues cracked, revealing things inside, things that should not be. Elias clutched his head as memories not his own flooded his mind. This place was never a city. It was never a civilization. It was a cage. And now the prisoner was free. The Protector attacked. A blur of movement. Blades of black energy igniting from its arms. It rushed the entity, striking with the force of a dying sun. The ground beneath them fractured, and the entity screamed, its voice turning the air into something toxic. Arya dragged Elias back. "We need to go. We have to." The entity turned to them. Elias felt his body lock in place, his veins burning as the entity's attention fixed on him. It was pulling him in, unraveling the very threads of his being. The Protector roared. It tore into the entity, severing something Elias couldn't comprehend. The pain vanished, and Elias collapsed, gasping. The Protector turned its head toward them. "Leave." Arya pulled him up. They ran. Behind them, the battle raged, the Protector clashing with something that had no true form. The walls of the city crumbled, corridors shifting and closing, forcing them toward the exit. The storm outside had worsened, the sky now a churning void. The Odyssey was still there. Barely intact, but intact enough. Elias threw himself inside, his hands flying over the controls. Come on, come on." Arya sealed the hatch. "We need to go now." A deafening sound split the sky. The city was collapsing. Through the viewport, Elias saw it, the Protector, still fighting, still holding the thing back. The Odyssey's engines roared to life. They launched. As they ascended, Elias looked down at the city. The vault was gone. The thing inside it was gone. But the Protector. It stood there, watching them leave. Not victorious. Just waiting. Because this wasn't over. Not yet. The Odyssey punched through the storm, its hull groaning under the strain as Elias fought to keep it steady. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the ruins below. The city was collapsing in on itself, swallowed by the shifting landscape. But even through the chaos, one thing remained clear. The Protector was still standing. And the thing from the vault was changing. Elias barely had time to process what he was seeing before the sensors screamed to life. Arya cursed, slamming her hands over the controls. Massive energy spike. "It's coming from..." She didn't need to finish. The entity moved. It wasn't bound to the ruins anymore. It wasn't tethered to the vault. It had escaped its prison, and now it was rising. A shape coalesced from the storm, twisting, expanding, something between shadow and raw gravitational force. The ship's instruments malfunctioned instantly, data streams collapsing into gibberish. The entity wasn't just disrupting reality. It was rewriting it. And it was coming for them. "Full burn!" Elias roared. "Get us out of here!" Arya slammed the thrusters forward. The Odyssey lurched, engines screaming as they pushed beyond safety limit. The ship rocketed through the upper atmosphere, breaking free of the storm's grip. The orbital trajectory locked into place, but the entity followed. "That's not possible!" Arya shouted. It should have been bound to the surface. It should have been limited by physics. But the thing had no concept of should. A black tendril stretched upward, reaching through the atmosphere, tearing apart the laws of existence. It was everywhere at once, its presence clawing at the ship's hull, warping metal, bending space itself. Elias's vision blurred. His thoughts unraveled. He could feel it pressing against his mind, something vast and insurmountable. It wasn't just chasing them. It was pulling them back. Then, a flash of blue light. The Protector. It had followed them into the sky, leaping from the ruins with impossible speed. Blades of energy flared to life in its hands as it collided with the tendril, severing it with a single, perfect strike. The entity shrieked, its form destabilizing. The force of the impact sent the Odyssey spiraling, alarms howling as the ship tumbled through the stratosphere. Elias wrestled the controls, muscles screaming as he fought against the pull of gravity. "Stabilizers offline!" Arya yelled. They were going down. The clouds ripped apart and suddenly, they were over the ocean, a vast, endless abyss of dark water stretching beneath them. The Odyssey's engines flared, but the damage was too severe. The ship hit the surface hard, skidding across the waves, metal groaning under the impact. Then, silence. The only sound was the crackling of sparking wires and the distant roar of the storm above. Elias blinked, his vision swimming. His fingers still clenched the flight controls, knuckles white. His chest ached with the effort of breathing. Arya groaned beside him, pushing herself upright. "We're alive," she muttered, half in disbelief. "Not for long," Elias rasped. He turned to the viewport. The ocean stretched endlessly, eerily still. But in the distance, beyond the wreckage of the city, the entity was still there. It hadn't been destroyed, just delayed. And the Protector. It was standing on the wrecked hull of the ship, watching them. The air rippled, and suddenly, the Protector was inside. It hadn't used the hatch. It hadn't needed to. It simply was there. "You cannot run," it said. "Not from this." Elias clenched his fists. "Then tell us how to fight it." The Protector was silent. Arya glared. "You were guarding that thing. You knew this would happen. What the hell is it?" The Protector's head tilted slightly, as if considering. Then, slowly, it spoke. "It is what remains of those who came before. Those who built this place. Those who lost." Elias's stomach twisted. "You mean it's—" He swallowed. "It's them? A shadow of them. A memory given hunger. They sought to become more. They became something else." Arya exhaled sharply. "And now it wants us?" The Protector nodded. "It remembers you. It sees you now. You set it free, and now it will never stop hunting." Elias felt cold. He had spent his life searching for the past, for lost knowledge. And now, because of him, something ancient and starving had awoken. He looked at the Protector. "Can it be killed?" A long silence. Then, a single word. "Perhaps?" Arya let out a bitter laugh. "That's not comforting." The Protector turned its head toward the sky, where the entity was moving, shifting its mass, preparing to strike again. "We do not have time for comfort." A pulse of darkness rippled outward. The sea froze mid-motion, waves locked in place like sculpted glass. The sky cracked as if reality itself was splintering. Elias felt the pull again. The whispers returned, stronger now. It was coming. The Protector took a step forward. "There is one way." Elias swallowed. "Tell me." The Protector's glowing eyes locked onto his. "You must seal it again. But this time, you must be inside when it closes." Silence. Arya stared. "That's a joke, right? Tell me that's a joke?" Elias didn't answer. He understood what the Protector meant. The vault had only worked before because something, had been sacrificed to contain it. The ancient builders had tried to ascend, but instead they had become the very thing that destroyed them. And now it needed a new warden. The Protector raised its blades. "Decide quickly, because the entity was almost here." Elias had made impossible choices before, but none like this. The Odyssey shuddered as the ocean froze around them, waves suspended mid-crash, the very laws of nature breaking apart. Overhead, the entity loomed, a writhing mass of shadows and hunger, its tendrils stretching across the sky like a storm given form. And it was coming for him. He felt it now, the way it pressed against the edges of his mind, searching for a way in. It didn't just want to consume him. It wanted to make him part of itself. "How do we seal it?" Elias asked, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his chest. The Protector's glowing eyes met his. "We must return to the vault. The prison must be rebuilt. But this time, it must have a new heart, a new warden." Elias understood what that meant. Arya grabbed his arm. "No. Absolutely not. We'll find another way." "There is no other way," the Protector said. "The first ones believed they could control what they created. They failed. Now, you must decide if you will finish what they could not." Elias looked up at the thing in the sky, at the impossible hunger reaching for him. Maybe it had always been waiting. He exhaled. "How do we get back to the vault?" The Protector raised a hand. The world broke apart. One moment they were inside the wrecked Odyssey. The next they were falling, through space, through time, through something far deeper. The frozen ocean vanished. The storm above flickered out. For a brief, endless moment Elias saw everything, the rise and fall of civilizations, the gods they had tried to become, the price they had paid for their arrogance. Then the ground slammed into him. They were back in the ruins. But the city was different now. The towers weren't just collapsing, they were changing, warping as the entity pulled the very material of the world into itself. The vault's remains loomed ahead, cracked and broken, leaking energy like an open wound. And the entity was already there. It had anticipated them. Tendrils of shadow lashed out, striking with impossible speed. The Protector moved first, blades flashing in arcs of blue light, severing the appendages before they could reach Elias and Arya. "Geo," the Protector roared. Elias didn't hesitate. He ran. Arya was right behind him, covering his flank with a plasma rifle, firing shot after shot into the writhing horror trying to consume the ruins themselves. The vault stood ahead. But the doors were gone, torn apart in the explosion. The containment field was shattered. There was nothing left to hold the entity back. Unless he became the containment. Elias skidded to a halt at the edge of the vault's entrance, staring into the swirling void beyond. The energy inside was alive, pulsing, waiting for something, or someone, to complete it. "Tell me what to do," he shouted. The Protector was still fighting, barely holding the entity at bay. But its voice rang through the ruins like a command from the past itself. "Step inside." Elias hesitated only a second. Then he turned to Arya. "You need to go." Her eyes widened in horror. "Elias, don't do this. We'll figure something else out." "There is nothing else," he yelled. "If we let this thing loose, it'll spread. It won't stop with this world. It won't stop with this system. It'll devour everything." Arya clenched her fist. "Then we find another way." He grabbed her hand. "We don't have time." Her expression broke, and for a moment, she looked like she was going to hit him. But then her grip tightened around his, and she nodded. A single, shaking nod. Then she turned and ran. Elias took a deep breath. Then he stepped forward. Into the vault. The moment he crossed the threshold, he felt it. The entity lunged, sensing what was happening. It tried to reach him, tried to wrap its tendrils around his body, his mind. But the vault's energy reacted instantly, pulling him deeper, drawing the doors back into existence. The Protector drove both of its blades into the entity's core, pinning it for just a second, just long enough. Elias felt the seal begin to form. The walls of the vault closed around him, metal reshaping, locking into place, energy cascading through the chamber. He screamed as the power surged through his body, searing him from the inside out. The entity shrieked, trapped, pulled with him into the seal. For one final moment, Elias felt himself slip away. And then, silence. The ruins were gone. Or rather, they had returned to what they had always been, a dead city, abandoned and quiet. The vault was whole again. Its doors were sealed. The energy was contained. And the entity was no longer hunting. Arya stood outside, staring at the smooth, featureless structure before her. There was no sign that Elias had ever been there. She clenched her fists. Behind her, the Protector remained standing, staring at the vault with an unreadable expression. "It is done," it said. Arya turned, her voice low and furious. "Is he?" The Protector tilted its head slightly. "He is within." She swallowed. "Is he alive?" A long silence. Then, "He is the seal now." Arya closed her eyes. She had known the moment he stepped through those doors that she would never see him again. But somehow, hearing it said aloud hurt more than she had expected. The Protector turned away, gazing toward the ruins, as if sensing something distant. "It will not return," it said. "Not as long as he holds it back." Arya clenched her jaw. "Then we find a way to get him out." The Protector didn't respond. Because they both knew the truth. Some doors were not meant to be reopened. And some sacrifices were never meant to be undone. Far beyond the vault, beyond the city, beyond time itself, Elias floated in darkness. Or maybe he was the darkness now. The entity was here, trapped with him. It no longer whispered. No longer screamed. It simply was. And so was he. The last warden. The final guardian of a prison meant to last forever. And as he stared into the endless void, listening to the silent hum of eternity, he heard the faintest echo, a voice, calling his name. And somewhere deep in the impossible black, he smiled.